Today on the show, I have the pleasure of speaking with Billy Keels. Now, Billy is the founder of First Generational Capital Partners. He formed this company off the back of his success investing in real estate and being able to produce consistent passive income that has allowed him to achieve financial freedom. But it took Billy over 8 years to hit his target, and now he's in a position to help others to achieve the same success he has with his proven system of investing in real estate. Now, to top it all off, Billy is the opposite of me. He is an expat living in Spain, but he's an American by nature, and you'll get to hear him in a little bit. But he's got an incredible story. He's been in Europe since 2001, so over 20 years living abroad as an expat. I really resonate with that. And he's also in real estate investing back here in the United States. Okay, Billy, welcome to the show. How you doing today, mate?
Reed, you absolutely rock, man. I love being able to hang out with you, listen to the things that you're talking about. And I was like, is that really me? And you said over 20 years in Europe. And yes, it has been over 20 years in Europe. And I'm super excited to have another conversation with you. A lot of people are going to be listening to us this time. So try and keep it clean.
We've been connected for a little while now. I want to say probably at least 4 to 5 years. We've at least known about each other through, I think when I first got started in the space, attracting international investors to the US, you're obviously abroad, you're trying to attract, friends and family that you were doing in your corporate, formal corporate world. But with that being said, I want to get into that. I want to use today as, clearly we've got similar paths, just in different countries. But before we do, I want you to rewind the clock and tell me how you made your first ever dollar as a kid.
Wow, the very first dollar. That's a great question. The very first dollar I made was because I watched my parents. Neither one of my parents had a college education, or they never finished, and so they always said work, work, work. And I remember at 12, I think it was 11 or 12, I had a paper route where we were living in Texas, and I used to get the local newspaper, and they would show up at the house, and we have to put them all these plastic bags. But yeah, that was the first dollar I made.
Awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. Working like as a job. So that was pretty interesting.
How was your upbringing in America, American kid doing the paper route? What was your relationship with money and really entrepreneurship?
Yeah, man. So a couple things. So having parents that didn't have a college education, which they thought that was super important. And they both worked 2 jobs. I watched them make some very, very difficult decisions. Read, like at the end of the month, if they were going to pay this bill or that bill. I always said, we always had food in our home, so it was never a challenge. But I just watched the challenges and the arguments that happened around money. So when I grew up, money it wasn't really a subject that I like talking about, because when you don't have it, it's usually a source of tension. And so on the same note, because it was such a sore spot, I guess it's one of the things that has really driven me as well. In the beginning was to actually have money. And part of the reason was when my parents, because they didn't have money and they thought education was really, really important, like formal education, they worked really hard to make sure that we were in the quote unquote good school districts. And so I had the good fortune of being able to see a lot of friends of mine whose parents were able to provide them all this kind of really cool stuff, great cars and all this stuff, great, clothes. And my parents couldn't do that. And so it also made it a little difficult, right? Because I'm seeing all these kids around me, that my friends, and it seems like they have extra money doing this and doing that. And my parents really struggled. So early on, having the exposure to those things was really good, because I knew I had to work hard to be able to get those. And at the same time, it was kind of challenging, because my parents were working like 4 or 5 times what some of my other friends, at least my perception was at that time. It just didn't seem like it was right. But
no, it's an interesting question to bring up around how people have, relationships with money. It definitely does. A lot of people in this show that I've interviewed, including myself, I didn't come from means. I, very, very not blue collar, but very middle of the road type of stuff, and resonate with the same sort of, not necessarily arguments, but there was an underlying tension there, growing up that you could feel as a kid. You just didn't know, okay, we got the secondhand car, and my mates have got the brand new one coming to school. I never went with that either, but you felt as in the working class that there was just a different there was a sense of like there wasn't just money to burn, and you had to work for chores, and you were being very conscious of hand-me-downs and stuff like that. So it's interesting, but it also helps pave the path for where you're coming to today. So walk us through the early career of Billy, and we spoke a little bit about this offline in the green room, but what you've been doing over the last 20 years, and traveling the world and being the opposite of me, and now living in another country.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So, and I think of myself as I got really good grades in school, so I worked really hard. I was that like classic A student, right? I did everything I was supposed to do, and I got good grades. And as a result, every time I thought if I studied and I worked really hard, then I was going to get the good grade, the A, and I was going to get that smile and that pat on the back. And I did that through college. And one of the things where I went to college, like the dream job at my college was to work for Procter & Gamble, because I was a marketing major. That was my first major. Well, I did everything that I was supposed to do. I got all the good grades, and then I got into this process, and guess what, Reed? I started the process, but I got rejected. I got rejected from the job, and I didn't really know how to handle that. So that was kind of like terrible. And so I decided to go back and get a second degree. And I went overseas for the very first time in my life. And when I came back, I had this overseas experience. I was not really speaking a new language, but I kind of was. It was Spanish, by the way. I went to Valencia, and I was like, well, now's the time. Like I've got fifth year, second degree. I have this extra experience. And so it was time to go back and get my dream job. And when I went through the process again, I got booted from the process. So rejected twice. And that just like really crushed me, because I wasn't used to dealing with this kind of rejection. But it was like the single biggest thing that changed my life, to answer your question, because when I got rejected the second time, a really good friend of mine, I was a co-chair of a student body organization. He was from St. Louis, Missouri, and he told me about this group of people that worked and traveled around the world. They traveled with Fortune 500 CEOs and things like that on business meetings, leisure trips. And so I had the good fortune of, out of about 6,000 candidates, I was one of 26 people that was able to start working at this company. And the reason that the rejection was one of the best things that ever happened to me, Reed, and this is some of the things we talked about, in that next 5 years, I had the opportunity to experience things that I'd never, ever imagined, because I'm from Columbus, Ohio, right? Blue collar family. And I worked and traveled throughout 58 countries. Wow. And it just absolutely changed the way that I saw the world. The things that I thought were reality, sometimes it was just, that's the way that I was taught. It wasn't necessarily the way that it happened everywhere else. So it was a real growth experience. And after that 5 years in 58 countries, I didn't see myself going back to a normal 9-to-5 job. So I took a 1-year sabbatical. That 1-year sabbatical was accepted at university in Paris. So I was in Paris. I wanted to learn French language and culture. I wanted to learn more about wine, and I wanted to learn how to salsa dance, because I'm very objectives, goal driven, right? I don't know how these three things work, but I can tell you that the wine helped my salsa dancing, that's for sure. But anyway, so I got into the IT space while I was there, because I decided I didn't want to go back to the US, because I was having such an amazing experience. And this was right after 2001, the Twin Towers, right? And so I was in France at a time that was, the tensions between the US and the French were pretty high, right? And so I realized, like, living through that situation and being able to talk to people and challenge the way that I always thought about the world and saw things, I really wanted to stay. I started speaking the language. And so as I stayed, I moved from Paris. I went down to the South, and I started getting into the IT space. I was in hardware, and then I moved to software. And eventually, while I was in the south of France, I ended up meeting this really cool person, this nice woman from Spain. They sent me to Italy. So I actually started a sales team in Italy for a while, and she and I stayed in touch. I went back to France and eventually moved to Barcelona, Spain. And so that's actually how I ended up here in Spain. We got married in September of 2008. Our first child was born in May of 2009, and our second October of 2009, and our second in May of 2011. And so I always kind of tell people, when you're going after things, or you've been rejected and you want to take that 1-year sabbatical, that you have to be careful, because that could turn into 3 countries, 4 additional languages that I've learned. It could be a marriage and 2 additional kids. So, that has been something that's really, been a big impact. And it all started from points of rejection, right? Because I didn't think that well, I was an A student, and I thought the only thing that was really going to be the next path was going into that corporate job. And when that rejected it, it's turned to so many different things since then. And also now I've also had a chance to work and travel throughout 86 countries. So it's changed quite a bit. Yeah, I've been very fortunate.
Well, I think it also it's a good lesson, and I am a proponent of this. One of the biggest things I will tell young people, particularly young entrepreneurs, if they're really young in their 20s, like, what do you recommend? I want to get into real estate. Want to get a hustle. And I actually said to them, go traveling, get out of the US and go traveling, and go get some bit of street smarts. See how other people live their life. You will be a lot better for it, and you can come back and you'll still be here. You'll still always be here. You can still start, but having that ability to go and not chase, but be curious around other things and other cultures is really important. As not only is it important in entrepreneurship and business, but it also broadens the mind in terms of how things impact around the world, not only from an economics point of view, but how trade is done, how international business is done, how money is transferred across the globe, how other people see opportunities. Unlike other people, like for me, I see opportunities in the United States that maybe the average person who's been living here forever doesn't see it, right? Yeah. So you have the same experience living abroad in other countries, and that's what travel does. So I'm a huge proponent of it, and I could talk all day about that, but I don't want to. But tell me how you get involved in the real estate space, because that's obviously where the story now. You've come through 20 years of being abroad. You've been successfully investing in real estate for the last 8 or 9 years. You've built up a really good, nice nest egg, which has allowed you now to exit the day job, which must feel incredible. But also, how was that journey, and how did you get started?
Yeah, so one of the things that happened, and just getting started in real estate, and it's changed my life because it's actually helping to open my mind to new opportunities, just to your point, right? But it all started as someone who is a really great student, once again, because it comes back to what the things that you learn when you were little, right? As I was going through my career, I told myself that I really wanted to have as much control over my financial life. Well, things happened in 2000. I'd been working for like 5 or 6 years. The dot-com bubble happened. That didn't work out so well. And my portfolio suffered. And then the same thing happened about 8 years later. And so the same thing happening twice was not a good thing, because my parents always said, Billy, if something happens once, shame on them. If it happens twice, shame on you. And so I had to realize that, not coming from money, that I couldn't put my financial life, i.e. retirement and things like that, in someone else's hands. So I needed something that I had more control over. And good fortune had, I was in the States, and I'd come across this little purple book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I know everybody talks about. And I started reading it, but I didn't finish it. And so it took me about 2 years. I was back stateside, and then this time I picked the book up and I actually read it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Hang on a second. So I read the whole thing. And like most people, I went down the rabbit hole. I read every single Rich Dad book, all the advisors, all this and that. I started watching, videos. I was listening to podcasts and things like that. And I became a theoretical ninja. Like, I knew everything. I could tell you every single thing that was going to happen, that you needed to happen, and how much money you were going to get, and your CADs and your net profit and all that stuff. Well, that was going really, really well. And I knew all of the theory. And I was also a young father. And it actually took me from going from the theory of knowing things to actually getting into action for something that up until recently, I was not very comfortable sharing, because it happened to do with me as a young father and wanting to be there for my wife and for my kids and be present. And I'll never forget the night before my oldest child's 3rd birthday. I didn't sleep very well. It wasn't a good time, because I knew that the next morning I had to leave. And so because I had to leave on my oldest son's 3rd birthday, I woke my wife up really, really early. It was like 5:45, and our 1-year-old woke them up. And, you can imagine at that time of the morning, they're all kind of all over the place. I went and, I got out of the shower, and I was ready. I had my suit and tie on, was ready to get out the door. And I woke up our 3-year-old, and we sang happy birthday, and I gave him a hug and kiss, and I left. And so as I left, it was one of those things where I just literally was sick to my stomach, because I knew I was out of alignment, because one of the things that I really wanted to do is be present for special events. And so I remember being at the business meeting all day in Frankfurt, Germany. After that, we, that night, my wife my 1-year-old and our 3-year-old for his birthday, they were with my in-laws. They were singing happy birthday and blowing out the candles. And I was at some business meeting that I don't even remember what it was. Right. And so the reason I tell you that is because that it took that moment for me to go from the theoretical ninja on all the stuff that I was learning about real estate to actually taking action, because I couldn't take control. I couldn't actually take control of any of the outcomes unless I actually started doing it. And so it took about 8 months, but I bought my very first property 8 months after that. My wife and I were in Cairo, Egypt, and we bought our very first small duplex in New Jersey. And that was one of the things that that got me started. And then I had the 5-year goals, and like many people, and I'm sure you know this sounds very familiar, once you write it down and you start taking action, it only took 18 months to get to the 5-year goals, right? And it's like, I should have thought much, much bigger than that. And that helped me. And I started in real estate and have since done a number of other things, but I kept being in my corporate role for a similar kind of reason. And I enjoyed it. Like, I think most people, when they saw me on LinkedIn, like I had for a while, Reed, I was the happy corporate employee because I enjoyed what I was doing in an IT sales leadership across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Then over the last couple of years, I was here locally in Spain as a senior executive, and being able to do things and being recognized. I was on trips to Hawaii for top achievers and all this kind of stuff, and top talent program. But in the last quarter of 2021, my dad started having some challenges health-wise. And it really took me traveling back and forth from Spain to the US to visit him and see him. And he was actually in the ICU. And I just remember being there with him, thinking to myself, you know what? This whole thing is pretty finite. Like, I'd lost family and friends before, but that was the thing that really made me realize, like, hey, you've been doing this work for the last 9.5 years. You've been living 2 lives. During the day, you're this, like, early morning, you're building your business and you're talking to your investors. And then you go for a whole portion of the day from like 8:30 in the morning until late at night, and you're doing your corporate job. And then you start again, building your business. And I realized that it's about time. It's not about continuing to just have more and more and more money, because you can't take it with you.
Right.
And that was the thing that has really, like, kind of like the 2 major things that helped me realize I got to take action. I can't just be a theoretical ninja. And when is enough enough? And so now I'm at the point where it's about, how do I spend my time in being able to invest my time is probably a better way to say, how do I invest my time in the way that gives me the best return and the best feeling? And that's really where I am right now, man, in terms of life.
Yeah, no, look, I appreciate that you sharing that and the vulnerabilities in and around that. And again, I can resonate with you, because I had, chasing my goals 5 years ago, my mum passed away, and leading up to that, I was still working full time with a developer here in LA, and traveling back and forth to Australia. And I remember getting home 3 days before she passed, and being really devastated. And when I got back to the States, back to the day job, I was in a day job that I was learning a lot, and I was doing side hustles, and I'd already done a bunch of syndications. But I said to myself, like, and my mum would never have said to me, stop chasing your dream. But I had that selfishness, like shadow, if that makes sense. Yeah. And I'm sure you probably felt the same, right? Where you're faced with a reality that this is going to be finite, and people aren't going to stick around. So what the fuck am I doing? Playing this half-assed game. Yeah. Yep. I'm either put my big boy pants on, and this is not, for those people listening to this, I will preface, probably both Billy and I were at stages in our lives we've been working on it for a long period of time.
Yeah.
I know you would have been investing for a long period of time when you got to that point. I done 4 syndications as a side hustle, like lead syndications. Like, we weren't just like, screw the day job, let's get going.
Yeah.
But it was those moments in life that really. And I did a podcast on this show back after she passed, called Priorities versus Goals, and you should go back and listen to it. Not you, Billy, but the listeners. Where I talk a little bit about, you got to have a goal has a target against it, right? And I remember hearing this incredible entrepreneur, Dan Priestley, and he's an Australian, and he wrote the book Key Pursuit of Influence, and he says, does it, and I sort of took the words, and I sort of said to myself, does it matter if I have 2,000 units in 2018, when I'm sitting with my grandkids when I'm 80 years old, does it matter if I have 2,000 units in 2018 or 2,000 units in 2021? And the answer is it doesn't. But you have to, in the same breath, you have to also enjoy the journey, because why are you on this path if you don't go out and take yourself seriously? So I think, and I just share that with you because I want to mirror, back to you and say thank you for being vulnerable, because I think that is these moments in life so many people can resonate with on listening, that they get to that point, you're like, what the hell am I doing? Like piss or get off the pot.
And I know we talk about with people all the time. And I used to, like I said, I was really ashamed to talk about the thing that happened with my son, that I missed his birthday, because I felt like I was not aligned, right? And so I felt shamed about that, and I didn't used to share that. But what I've realized is that I'm not alone. There are a lot of people that go through that. The difference is that made me go from theory to action.
Yep.
Because if I would have just kept going around and around, I would have missed more special things that were special for me, right? And from that moment, I never missed another one, right? I didn't mean that I didn't work a lot, because I did work a lot, by the way. And like you said, it took me 9.5 years. This was not something that happened overnight. And along the way, I found out I was things like an accredited investor. I didn't know what that meant at the time, because I was just, head down and all this kind of stuff. And then I realized that it wasn't about just the money that I was making, but it was about the time that I had, how was I using it, and how was I deploying the capital in a way that made the most sense for me. So yes, to reiterate, it did not happen overnight. It did not happen perfectly. I made many mistakes along the way. But what I realized that it is not just about making money. And I don't say that lightly, because I don't come from money. I know that it takes money to be able to pay your bills, to be able to do the things that you want to be able to do. But you start to realize that, the most important thing is, how are you investing your time? Ultimately, is what it comes down to.
No, and I now want to pivot and get into what you're building now, but it is important to come from those positions. And you say it's really the alignment, the self-awareness. Where are you? I'm sure a lot of us, if we sat down and thought about the times in our lives where they're pivotal, it was because you weren't in alignment, because you had an internal feeling that you didn't know, it didn't seem right, and you had to react to that. And sometimes you're in a subconscious is already telling you stuff and sending alarm bells before you even know what you're doing. So again, moving away from that pain into something that is, creating a life that you want to live. So talk to me about what is Billy 2.0 looking like? How is the business going? What are you out there to achieve?
Yeah, man. So as it relates to where we are now, so the thing that I loved and love about real estate is the fact that it's something that has a POC, a proof of concept. So it is not very difficult to understand. People need a place to live, and if you provide that service, then people in exchange will be willing to pay you for that. And the fact that you can have much more control over that versus the stock market was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And so continue to build out personal portfolio. One of the things I mentioned before, like I didn't even know that I was an accredited investor, right? Because I didn't come from a family of accredited investors and I wasn't really talking about it. And it took me until the point that I had in my own personal portfolio, I think it was about 30 units, something like that. And of course, I'm doing all this from Barcelona, Spain, because everything that I do is back in the United States. And it was along the way that I found out about this thing called passive investing. I didn't even know that it existed, Reed. I was like, hang on a second, I'm doing all this work and I can actually give somebody else $200,000 or $300,000 and they will actually do all of the work for me. I can keep doing my job and they will do the work and pass the returns my way. Okay, cool. That sounds good. So then I started investing passively with other people in large multifamily complexes, much like the ones you do. I got into ATM machines. And at the same time, I started realizing like, hey, this is really cool. And over a couple of years, I started realizing that I had these passive losses. And so I didn't understand that. And so I invested and understood more with my tax team and what that meant. And then I also started figuring out how I could stop, or I shouldn't say stop, but how I could also start to mitigate some of the W-2 income that I was paying, because I was still paying like 45% in my W-2 wages, which didn't feel too good. So I started investing also too in the energy space. And so what I realized is, as all of these vehicles, and one of the reasons that I really, really love real estate is because, number one, it helped to open my eyes to not just depending on the stock market, because that you have absolutely no control over. And it helped me to get into the world of passive investing as well, because I didn't realize that I could leverage other people's talents. And then once I started realizing how I could also start to save some of the 45+% that I was paying to Uncle Sam, when I could actually keep some of that and then redeploy that back into other real estate investments and other passive investments, it was really that point that I started realizing it's, okay, I know the destination that I want to get to, and it's a matter of how do I effectively utilize the different vehicles that are there to be able to get to the destination in a way that feels comfortable for me. And so now the way that I continue to invest in real assets. And our company today is focused a lot more on helping those high wage earners that have specific issues with earned income. So W-2 income in terms of the tax obligation that most of us have. So always in the real asset world, and always continuing to educate and learn which is the right vehicle to get to the destination.
Love it. And so how are you? Is it the international folks you're talking to, or are you also talking to US-based folks as well?
Well, you know what? So talking to many people, but the people that we're really focused on helping today are accredited investors in the United States. And the reason for that is because what we're doing, focusing a lot on in the energy sector with carbon capture equipment. And so that's helping, there's specific tax benefits that help US-based either residents or citizens. So although we're speaking to a number of people, where we're really focused today is on that accredited investor that lives in the United States or is a US citizen living abroad.
Talk to us a little bit about the energy capture stuff. I love it. I'm a big proponent of it. I don't do enough of it, but the little things I can try to do on my properties, like low flow toilets and solar screens and new thermal energy stuff with regards to the HVAC. I try to do, but what are you doing in the carbon capture space?
Yeah, so in carbon capture, it's a little bit different than that. So with the carbon capture specifically, what we're doing is helping the government produce more energy, right? And as a result of helping them to produce more energy and helping large companies to be able to do that, and they're using our pieces of equipment, which are carbon capture equipment, and they're using that equipment to increase production of energy. And so we are. It's carbon capture equipment. Yeah. Okay. So the equipment is actually carbon capture, and they're attached to large pipelines, typically, sometimes to well bores. And as we're capturing CO2 from pipelines or from well bores, they then use that to then increase the overall energy production. And so that's where we're focused, so that the accredited investors were actually purchasing large pieces of equipment. And we then, as those pieces of equipment are being utilized, we're able to use, very similar to what we're doing in real estate as well, with the bonus depreciation rules, being able to use those to help to mitigate on the tax portion. And I guess I should probably take a step back, as you know this already, and I know your audience knows this. I'm not giving anybody tax advice. Of course, you need to speak to your tax advisors and understand more about specific type of investment opportunities. So Reed and I are just talking about what we're doing specifically. So I hope that's okay that I mentioned that, Reed. Okay. All right, cool. So, so that is, that's the equipment, that's the use that we're doing for that. And as a result, you can, because of the structure of the different funds that we're using, or the fund that we're using, the investors are able to help to relieve some of the W-2 tax obligation.
Interesting.
Which actually one of the things that we found is pretty interesting, because when you're able to do that, you're then able to, from a tax perspective, from the examples that we've seen, right? When you're able to have that tax obligation lifted a bit, then that frees up capital to be able to do other things, like invest in other types of passive investments, right? I.e. real estate, et cetera. So what we're finding is that it really helps to relieve one of the main challenges for a lot of accredited investors. I mean, that was my situation, very specific situation. I was looking for a solution, found that solution, and now talk to others about it. And what we're seeing is that they're when they're able to have more control over their capital, or keep more of their money, they're then able to redeploy that into the most efficient type of investments, which typically are those that are passive.
Yeah, no, I love it. Are you just getting, is it just a tax benefit from this particular investment? Are you getting any cash flow, any appreciation over time?
There's consistent cash flow over time as well. And
Awesome. I'd love to get on your email list, and I'm sure we'll ask at the end where people can reach you if they want to get on that email list for that particular type of investment, because it is a very interesting. Carbon capture is very important, and being able to utilize that in a safe in a good space. So where is the company going to now? What's the goal over the next 5 years? You've achieved financial freedom. You've got out of the day job. Where are you headed, and what's the goal for your company today?
Yeah, so the real goal of what we want to be able to do is the next goal is to be able to serve 200 accredited investors. That's what we want to be able to do. And I guess this is probably a little bit specific because of the place where, and I love how you said this earlier, like the place where I was in my corporate role, I liked it. I was having a good time. And like I said, it took something else to make me want to do something else. And so right now it's really about helping the next 200 accredited investors, being able to deepen those relationships and be able to provide value in that way. Once we're serving 200 accredited investors, then we'll see what the next frontier is and where we go from there. But that's that's really the next goal. And so working on making sure that we have the right infrastructure, that we have the right team members on board, really focusing on who is on the team versus one of the things that I kept trying to do all the time, because this is what happens sometimes when you're an A student, is you try to do things yourself.
Yes.
Not a good way to make sure that you can serve people in the scalable way. Yes, that's exactly. Right. So that is really the focus now, is making sure the right people are on board and the right infrastructure is on board to be able to deepen the relationships for those 200 investors that we want to be able to serve. Awesome.
Are you getting any interest from the locals in Spain, Europeans, about money coming to the US and investing in, because I say to a lot of people when I pitch, in my mind, my view, just IMO, that US commercial real estate is the best yielding product in the Western world. You compare it to Australia, you compare it to Europe, you compare it to France, you compare it to, the Asian countries. I don't think you can find commercial real estate with all the financing that comes along with the US here and the growth of the GDP, that it's an ideal world. I don't know if that's the same sentiment you have living in Spain.
Yes, without a doubt, which is one of the reasons that I live in Spain but invest exclusively in the US. Because I think when you look at things, not even just thinking, but if you think about the political environment in the US in terms of how things are organized and the ability to control property, you look at the economic factors. You talked about the growth of GDP. You look at the number of Fortune 500 companies that are based there, the job growth, and then you look just culturally in the way people in the US move from one place to the next, where you have large metropolitan statistical areas where people are used to moving from LA to Boston, from Boston to Chicago. And in between the political environment, the economic environment, and the cultural environment, it really makes the US extremely unique, and one of the main reasons that so much capital continues to go there. Right. I mean, I love living in Europe, right? I love living here. That's why I stay here. And I love investing in US based assets, just because it's hard to beat that.
Do you look around in the backyard in Spain at anything, like any commercial stuff over there?
Reed, so I'll tell you what, and this happened early on because I didn't know what I didn't know when I got started, right? Because you don't have the education and you don't have the network. And so when I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, one of the things that happened when I read through that whole series, I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so awesome. I'm going to be able to find this. I'm going to get $200-$300 a door, because that's what I was thinking at the time, right? I was like, this is going to be fantastic, and I just need to go buy a place. And so I went out and I was all excited, and I went to these places and I was looking, I'd start penciling things out, and I was like, oh, that's minus 50 euros. Well, hang on a second. Minus 250 euros a month. And when I would talk to my friends, my friends were like, oh yeah, but that's fine. If you're only paying 50 euros a month, 100 euros a month, no big deal. You'll get that all back. And I was like, well, hang on a second. I don't understand this. You're telling me that you want me to pay for something that I then have to continue to pay for every month. I'm like, that's not an investment. I'm paying for it. And so I realized pretty quickly that it just didn't work. And so, but what I didn't realize is because I didn't know the difference between a location that is more cash flow based versus a location that is more appreciation based, right? When I got started. Right. And so I didn't have a network. I didn't have anybody that I could talk to. And once I started to build process and systems and teams that were back in the United States, I just haven't really even spent time looking. And when the few times that I have looked, there's still pretty much negative return in the area where I'm here. In the
residential space.
Yeah.
Right?
In the residential. Yeah.
No, it's always interesting. I always try to keep a pulse on what my buddies are doing back in Australia in the commercial space, just to see, trying to compare the apples to apples on, say, an industrial deal or, a petrol station with a retail strip center ground up. How do those returns compare to what I can find here in the US? And it just keeps me sharp. So I was just curious.
And even with if you think about the commercial residential, right, it's even different. And this is the cultural understanding that you and I have had when you're living in a different place. Like here, the concept of buying a 250 unit apartment complex or a 300
doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist, right? Right. I mean, you can live in a building, but it's very much like in New York, where the building, each floor is owned by a different person. So just the whole concept of being able to, you can't. It's difficult to compare. It's difficult to compare.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, mate, look, at the end of every show, we love to dive into the top 5 investing tips. You ready to get into it?
Yeah, I'm ready, man.
Mate, what is a daily habit you practice to keep on track towards your goals?
Without a doubt it's to start my day off in the right way for me. And the way that I start off every day is with savers. So Hal Elrod, and being able to just make sure that I'm mentally starting in the right way. And then after that, one of the things that I've been focused on now is not necessarily goals. I like what you said earlier. It's kind of like, what are my big 3 priorities for the day? And a lot of that comes through Free to Focus. And that's how I stay on top of what the priorities that I have for that day. I try to make it a maximum of 3.
Yeah. Any more than 3, you're doing just too much on the to-do list. You get nothing done. Yeah. So no, I completely agree. All right. Question number 2 is, who's been the most influential person in your career to date?
It's hard to say one person, but it's both of my parents, because I have things about me that I notice that are, it's the 2 of them in terms of the way that I work. The motivators for me, though, without a doubt, are my wife and my kids. I know it's not one person, but it's kind of the things that motivate me, and the awesome things where I've learned from, man. No,
I think with your story you shared earlier about growing up and your relationship with money, but how your parents didn't go to school, go to university, and the big push to go there is really been probably a good launching pad for you, and appreciating what they did teach you in terms of around your hustle and you go get you type of attitude. So awesome stuff. In the business, question number 3 is, what's the most influential tool in that business? Like, it could be a piece of software that you can't run the business without, or it could be something physical like a journal or a phone that you just can't run that business without. What is it?
I don't think I could run it without my phone. But where I find that the most magic happens, because once again, I've been doing this long distance thing for 10 years, and I was using Zoom before people realized Zoom was a thing. And so many of the relationships where we are initiating and deepening the relationships today take place specifically over Zoom for me. So I think that's the thing that is the relationship initiator and also enhancer.
Yep. I love it, mate. Question number 4, in one sentence, what's been the biggest failure in your career? And what did you learn from that failure?
Trying to be perfect. That's the biggest failure, because you realize that I was trying to do things, because this goes back to early on, and you realize that it's about taking action on imperfect information. And once I started doing that consistently and realizing, hey, listen, even as an A student, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to course correct. And when I allowed myself to realize, you don't have to get this right. It's not going to be perfect anyway. Just go, just get started. Make sure you have enough information to get started. Don't overanalyze things. and then course correct. Like that's when I realized just to do that, get out of my own way. That's when the results really started taking off.
Love it, mate. Last question is, where can people reach you to continue the conversation? They want to be in your sphere. Where do they go?
Yeah. So if it's all right, I'll give them a couple different places. One, for those accredited investors that are interested in finding out more, especially if you're getting crushed by W-2 taxes, you can go to firstgencp.com/invest. I'd love to have a conversation with you. The website is firstgencp.com. I have a podcast. And by the way, and I meant to say this in the very beginning, but I can't thank you enough for being guest number 106. So episode 106 of the Going Long podcast. Reed absolutely crushed it. So you can check us out over there. And I also like connecting with people on LinkedIn. I share a lot of the things that I'm thinking and doing. And I think I'm the only Billy Keels here in Barcelona, Spain. So so it'd be pretty easy to find me.
Awesome stuff, mate. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. I want to just reflect some of the things that I took away from today's show. I think, your inquisitive nature to go out and try something. Probably a lot of Americans don't do that. Don't go and take that year sabbatical abroad and try and become a wine connoisseur and learn new languages. So kudos to you for doing that. That's then led you down this path of being abroad for the last 20 years. I can definitely resonate with that because when I first went abroad, it was just like, wow, the world is a freaking cool place. And it's only, the world is your oyster, as they say. You can make it what you want. And I think through that curiosity, you're able to get better jobs because you weren't defined by your borders. You got out and you got amongst it. So that helped you into becoming the person you are today. And then realizing, having those self-aware moments with your dad and with your son, saying, I know I need to do more with my W-2 income, but I need to also be there for the special moments, right? And thank you for being very vulnerable with me on that. And I just, man, I admire what you do. I think we get on like a house on fire, even though we haven't even met each other in person. But I'm sure we will one day, and we'll be able to share a beer. But did I leave anything out, mate?
No, man, you said a beer, but hopefully it'll be more than one.
Yeah.
But
bit of sangria, right? The sangria.
There you go.
You mentioned Valencia earlier, and I was like, I remember Valencia. I went to the Running on the Bulls. La Tomatina Festival, which was in, which is just outside Valencia. And I remember camping on the beach as a young 22-year-old backpacker and having the incredible time going through the streets of the little town of Valencia with a truck full loads of tomatoes, which was freaking cool, man. That's 2008. That was a few moons ago. But dude, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really enjoyed your company, and we'll catch up very soon.
Thanks, Reed. Appreciate it, man.
Well, there you have it, another cracking episode jam-packed with some incredible information. If you do want to check out what Billy's got going on, head over to firstgencp.com. That's firstgencp.com. You can also go to the Going Long podcast, which I've been a guest on, and check him out. Make sure you subscribe to his podcast and just get involved with what he's doing in his world. He's an incredible guy sharing some incredible information, and I'm very interested in that carbon capture myself personally. So if you are interested in learning more about the carbon capture programs, how they can help you with your W-2 income for those accredited investors, definitely check it out. I want to thank you all for taking some time out of the day to tune in to continue to grow your financial IQ, because that's what we're all about here on this show. If you do like this show, the easiest way to give back is to give it a 5-star review on iTunes. And all the show notes from today will be up on my website at reedgoosens.com. Don't forget, we also help investors invest in real estate syndications. We're going to do this all again next week. So remember, be bold, be brave, and go give life a crack.